Okay, I think we'll get started. So a very, very warm welcome. My name's Linda Amrane-Cooper, and I'm Director of the Centre for Online and Distance Education. And I'm going to introduce our speaker in a moment, which is Bobbi Moore, and absolutely delighted to have her with us. It's going to be, I think this is going to be a really successful webinar. So really looking forward to this and hoping that you'll engage with the session as much as you can through the chat, and we'll try and monitor questions and respond to those as we go along. We also always do a report on our webinars, which one of our wonderful code fellows, Claire Sanson, does for us, and that can be a space where we can pick up questions that perhaps don't get answered in today's session. But what I wanted to start with was talking about the thing that we're doing differently for this year. So for 2025, we've launched a webinar series called Learning and Teaching in Online Distance and Digitally Delivered Education, which is what this first session is about. And we're offering the opportunity for people to earn a digital certificate of achievement to recognise your engagement from the Centre for Online and Distance Education. So our series runs from November, from today through to June, and there are 7 linked topics. So we've really tried to think about what would a series of learning and teaching webinars cover. And when we first did our brainstorming on this, we had about 36 different topics. So I suspect we're going to be doing some more next year as well in this series, if it's successful. And of course, we always really appreciate your feedback. And in fact, this series is a result of feedback from our stakeholders saying that they wanted a series on learning and teaching and also wanted certification opportunities. So focus is on online and digitally supported learning. The webinars are free and the recordings will be available on the Code YouTube in due course. And there'll be a report from each of the webinars kind of capturing key discussion points. The Digital Certificate of Achievement is really aimed at stimulating your professional practice, deepening your professional engagement with the sort of things that collectively we're talking about here. So it's about engaging with and reflecting on new pedagogical ideas. And the series of webinars, as I've said, is structured to support understanding and insight. And we very much hope you'll be able to join all 7, but they are recorded. If you can't join us, you just need to register for them and you'll get the link to the recording. And they are all on the Code YouTube channel as well. Now, to gain the certificate, you'll complete a short reflection, about 1,000 words, based on 5 of the 7 webinars. So we've given you a chance to not maybe get engaged with all of them. And it's designed to help you to apply new ideas to your own practice and identify concrete actions for your professional growth. The deadline for submission via an online form is the 15th of July next summer. And as I said, you'll be reflecting on 5 of the 7 webinars. There is a small fee for the Certificate of Achievement to cover admin and feedback costs. Moving to today. So I'm really delighted to welcome you to this first of the series. And we're starting with setting the scene, thinking about the big picture. How are institutions approaching online learning and teaching? How are they designing for that? So Bobbi Moore is with us. Bobbi is just an amazing panelist, I think. So her experience as education strategic lead at the University of Southampton's Centre for Higher Education Practice has really brought into the forefront design at an institutional level. So she's got huge, extensive practical experience of institutional approaches to online education. But she's also, I believe, going to talk about how we as individuals can influence institutional approaches. Bobbi authored the University of Southampton's Framework for Education 2025 and co-authored the university's Common Framework for Online Education. So she's got that real experience. Bobbi, it's lovely to have you with us for this discussion. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Linda, for that introduction. And hi, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today. And I'm really pleased to be part of this series and to explore such an important topic with you all today. So as Linda said, I work at the University of Southampton. I've been there for about 10 years. And my background is in digital education. And in my current role as Education Strategic Lead, I'm responsible for academic professional development for educators across all our campuses at the university. And I also hold two senior leadership roles on two university-wide strategic education projects that are focused on transforming practices in digital teaching, learning, and assessment. And so I really do have a vested interest in institutional approaches that enable high quality digitally delivered education for both students and for staff, especially in complex environments. So what I thought we would do over the next 40 minutes is to explore at a very high level how to develop an institutional framework to support digital education and program design. And this will really be drawn from my experiences over the last 5 years from developing two institutional frameworks at the University of Southampton, which Linda just mentioned. As part of the presentation, I'll be reflecting on some of the challenges of this and the opportunities this kind of work can bring, and why taking an institutional approach really matters for staff and for student outcomes. There'll also be 2 points in this presentation. I'll be asking for your feedback too. So let's hope the tech is kind to me today when we launch those interactive exercises. Okay, so let's get underway, and I'll start with a challenge you may be familiar with. So in many universities or institutions, the development of digital education hasn't always followed a straight line. At times, it's been quite reactive, and we saw that during the pandemic when we had to pivot overnight to online teaching. And then, of course, more recently, when we're looking at emerging practices around AI. Sometimes development is driven by leadership changes in an organisation, or it could be in a response to student survey feedback, or it could actually just be driven by those select few in the organisation that happen to manage the IT resources or resources linked to digital. And what I've seen is often in that process of change and like wanting to get that project done, the pedagogy or the good educational practice principles and the considerations for organizational culture can take a back seat, and they can be an afterthought. And this also can be compounded by the fact that digital education or online education can often sit across multiple teams in a large university. So it could be in the learning design team, it could be in the IT department, it could be sitting within academic departments, the library, or even some cases in student services. So without that shared vision, when we're starting to scale change, it becomes really difficult. And what works in one discipline and works well in one discipline doesn't always translate to another. So you'll see on this slide, I put an extract from the 2024 Times Higher Education Digital Maturity Index report. And this here outlines many universities have a combination of legacy systems and newer platforms which often don't integrate well. And of course, this combination of different systems can cause inefficiencies, and it also can limit the ability to use data for decision making or for looking at how you improve digital learning at scale, or how you can improve the experience for students. So if we have this in mind, and we see that fragmentation then doesn't just affect systems and processes, it can also affect our people. So that's our staff and our students. And as educators, as we know, our role isn't just to design online courses with static content. We're really designing those learning experiences to set our students up for success. So we're thinking here about how students engage with content, how they use AI now. We're thinking about their well-being, their sense of belonging to programs, but we're also thinking about much, much more as part of structuring and facilitating a student learning journey. So with all this fragmentation in mind, what's the cost? So if we think about the cost to students and the impact on students, from a student experience point of view, if educational approaches, design approaches, and the linked support is fragmented, students can experience inconsistency, They've reported that they have confusion about what's going on, and it also can have a knock-on effect to like the lack of belonging. And as a result, one student, as you know, might have a really rich, engaging online experience in one program of study, but in another, they might really struggle through the bare bones of a course that doesn't even really meet those minimal digital expectations in 2025. So on this next slide, I've just put a couple of quotes. I've pulled out from the 2024-25 DISC UK Higher Education Students Digital Experience Insight Survey. And the findings here really outline that students want more consistent and inclusive approaches to digital learning. They want that clearer communication about what support is available. And they're also looking for that meaningful interaction within the digital learning environments. And these are just 2 points I've pulled out from the Insights report. And so if you haven't, many of you may be familiar with this, but if you haven't already, it's really worth a read because it really starts to set what we need to think about when we start developing institutional frameworks. Okay, so we've had a quick look at students. What about staff? What about the impact on staff? Well, that lack of clarity and the availability of practical advice the lack of clarity can really lead to overwhelm and disengagement. And there can be a resistance to change as part of that. And what academic staff and educators tell me are the barriers to enhancing their practice and their programs is often that lack of clarity and practical advice. And really, this is because, from my experience, they've got constant demands on them. And this can lead to a sense of overwhelm and even disengagement from the very teams within an organisation that are there to support them with delivering digital education. And of course, then we throw AI into the mix. And as you know, when there's no shared institutional approach to align support services or guidance, or even agreed principles, it's really hard to know where to begin. And for many of those, especially those who don't naturally embrace change, and they're not sure what the rules of engagement are, or they just don't have the headspace, that gap can feel almost impossible to close. So if you think about it, when academics and teaching staff are playing catch up, and a bit like in the image I've got on the slide there, they're already under pressure, and this can have a knock-on effect to student outcomes. So then, as you'll see in my next slide here, it's not surprising then what was reported in the recent GIST Teaching Staff Digital Experience Insight Survey. You'll see here that only 14% of higher education teaching staff in the UK felt they had time to explore new digital tools and approaches. And they also talk about the pressure and the stress linked to using all those fragmented systems and platforms to create content and communicate with their students. So fragmentation is a really, really important issue, and something that we need to consider when we're building those institutional approaches to supporting staff and students. So I'd just like to take a moment now to hear from you and really to reflect on your own context. So what do you think causes fragmentation at your university, institution, or organisation? I've set up a Vivox poll here. Matt's going to pop a link in the chat to vivox.app with the ID, or you can scan the QR code so you can access Vivox on your phone or in your web browser. You don't need to have a special app for it. It's hopefully pretty straightforward to use. And in the poll, I put 5 options you can choose from. Please choose one. If there's something else that you want to share that's not on that poll, please put that in the chat and I'll do my best, or Matt or Linda will do our best to pick that up when we look at the results of the poll. So I'm going to give you 2 to 3 minutes to access the app and then put in your views, and then we'll share the results in a moment. Okay, all the options apply. That's interesting. Okay, if we could choose all of them, I can see that all of the above, but if there was one that you think maybe that impacts you the most, if you could choose that, that'd be great.
There's a really interesting discussion going on in the chat there, Bobbi, as well as people engaging with the poll, which is, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Leadership challenges, yeah, slow but risk adverse decision making. So it's a really good thing. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now, and Matt can hopefully bring up the poll so we can have a look at the results. Okay, that's really interesting what's coming through. So I'm going to give it, there's lots of really nice comments coming through in the chat. So we'll give it another 10 seconds.
There's such an interesting dialogue happening in the chat here as well. People talking about confidence and competency, as well as perhaps age differences in terms of confidence around technology, and the resource challenges, and that's picked up a couple of times, I think, Bobbi, because we've got some statements around redundancy and key staff leaving, and we know that certainly within the UK at the moment there's quite a challenging environment, so there are quite a lot of redundancies going on within universities, and that kind of links into that resource, but also I think somebody pointed out about the importance of resource investment in developing staff, not just developing the tech. So really interesting stuff there. Does that make sense to you? Does that feel similar to what you were thinking, Bobbi?
Yeah, it really does resonate. And I think the comment I said before, sometimes that thought about getting a project done or just getting that implementing that piece of tech, people sometimes forget about that cultural change or supporting people through that process or what that actually means in practice. And so getting those wide range of views when we're looking at this is really important. And it's really interesting. I know some people were commenting that it was hard just to pick one. But if we see the results of the poll there, structural barriers and departmental silos, it seems to come out as the one thing that really causes that fragmentation in an organization. And I see this quite often, and I speak to colleagues within my institution, but also wider as well. That is a challenge. So thank you everyone for those comments. We might try and gather them up. And as Linda said, I think you're looking at, aren't you, making doing summaries of these as well.
We'll have a report, but I really do think that the dialogue that's gone on in the chat, as well as your prompt questions, is really, really interesting. So we will aim to capture that in the report, and share some of that discussion.
Thank you. That would be great. Thank you. Thank you everyone for that engagement there. So what I'll do now is I'll go back to sharing my slides. Right, we'll get there. Hold on a second.
No pressure, Bobbi. I can just pick up a couple of the things as well that have gone on in the chat. People talking about reorganization, restructuring, that having an impact. And also, I think it was interesting that the governance challenges, which I think weigh heavy on everybody's shoulders within that HE sector, governance and quality assurance, weren't actually considered to be that high a barrier. Perhaps they're just part of business as usual. You have to go through those steps. So yeah, lots of discussion there. If you're sharing your slides now.
Brilliant. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, it's really, really rich. I would like to go back through that chat and have a good look through that when I can. So, okay. So if fragmentation is clearly a challenge, then what can we do to mitigate this? Well, from my perspective, one way to reduce that fragmentation is through frameworks. And so I'm not talking about rigid templates that provide a tool I'm not talking about rigid templates. I'm really talking about a structure here that prompts dialogue, so it can guide design, and we're thinking about something here that can clarify what's needed to deliver a high quality education experience. And these are the frameworks that are linked to implementation. These are the frameworks that really have linked implementation plans. So we're thinking about who we need to reach with these frameworks. So it's beyond our educators, it's everyone involved in education. And again, we need to talk to those, we need to be able to communicate and reach those people as well that are making decisions about education, which includes that education infrastructure. So you need a framework that's got a good implementation plan. that enables educators to take ownership of their programs and really make enhancement and improvements. And these frameworks, I'd suggest, really need to be living and breathing documents. They need to be iterative and they need to adapt and mature over time, really to reflect the culture and the ambitions of the organisation. And when used well, I've seen frameworks, they really align with the institutional strategy and they can integrate really seamlessly into existing structures. But let's be clear, I'm not saying that frameworks are a magic bullet. I mean, gaining buy-in and traction across a large, complex organisation is really challenging, but they are an important part of the solution for reducing fragmentation. And this is because the best frameworks I've seen really recognise that education is a shared experience and a collective endeavour. It's shaped by students, it's shaped by educators, and it's shaped by our professional services, our external partners, and it's really future focused. And it acknowledges that context and that culture within an organisation. So from my view, they're not just documents, they can be real catalysts for change. And I've seen how when we've used the framework at Southampton, it's sparked conversation and it's really shaped thinking and provided that focal point for implementing meaningful enhancements. And this is so students, again, can locate themselves in the learning journey. And that was the feedback we had from our students when we ran our early focus groups. They really wanted to locate themselves in the learning journey through a coherent program that was designed well and delivered well. So what I've thought for the next 10 minutes is that I'd share an example from the University of Southampton, and this will hopefully provide some ideas on how you can create and implement institutional education frameworks. So let's have a look. So first of all, why a framework? So what I thought I'd do is I'll just frame it up the challenge we had and what change that this led to. So at Southampton, when COVID lockdown hit, I was asked to co-lead a strategic project at the university to support the pivot to online teaching. And just to give you a sense of scale, the University of Southampton is a large research-intensive higher education institution. We had about 2,800 academic staff at the time and about 25,000 students. And when I first came into that project, I really quickly identified there was no single coherent guide that colleagues could use to support their teams with online course design and delivery for our taught programs. That's our undergraduate and postgraduate taught. Yes, we had like handbooks and we had guides, and there was much advice being generated at the time. But much of this is really fragmented. It was saved on a SharePoint site or in Teams chat or located on a local platform somewhere. So as discussed, this fragmentation really risks that inconsistency and that diminished student experience. It also, as we discussed, can cause a significant workload and cause stress for staff as they're trying to make the right choices fast and find the information they need. So to address the gap and to really strategically provide that coordinated support across different teams in the institution, I proposed that new guidance be rapidly developed. And this was, really aimed to articulate the feasible ways in which programs could move online. So by May 2020, I'd established the university's common framework for online education with my colleague, Helen Carmichael. And the framework was developed with our staff and it was developed with our students, and then it was subsequently adopted as the university standard for all our online delivery at the time. And you'll see here some screenshots from the framework here on the slide. I'm not expecting you to read these in detail, but I'll give you a really brief overview. So the framework itself was built around 4 core principles, and this was to reflect the university's strategies and values. It was also set out 7 elements of good design to translate those principles into practice and really support with quality assurance for programs. And then a feature of the framework was the 4 lenses tool that helped staff examine and then rapidly review their programs design from a learner's perspective. So again, I'm not going to go into too much detail about the specifics of the framework. I can give you a link to an online version. And this is because it was developed in COVID and things have moved on a little bit. But my intention now is really to give you a high-level overview of the development process of creating an institutional framework and then the subsequent impact and then how it's led to further enhancement work across the university. Okay. So how do you develop an institutional framework? Oh, have I put those scratches on the slide? Have I drawn on that somehow?
No, I think somebody observing has done that by mistake.
All right, that's okay. I thought, oh, what have I done? Anyway, okay, that's fine.
I'll try and
So
rub them off.
all right. So how do you develop an institutional framework? Well, I'm just thinking from my experiences and from what I learned from developing a framework, there were five key stages that enable us to move or reduce that fragmentation to a more coherent institutional framework for online education. And for me, this wasn't just about producing a document. It really was about creating alignment, building that capability, and delivering a targeted professional development that could enable improvement at scale. So what I'll do is I'll run briefly through each of these stages of development. So stage one was, of course, to define the strategic gap and set the ambition. So this stage is all about understanding where we are and deciding where we want it to be. And it's about getting clarity of purpose and scale, and then deciding on the scope and the overall focus of the development work. So after I'd really acknowledged there was that gap in our support provision for staff at the university, I started to ask a series of questions. And I've included some of these on the slide here. And of course, the first one you start with is what are you trying to achieve and why? A fairly standard question. But then we started to think about where is the fragmentation and how will we reduce it? And then thinking about what threatens our ability to deliver support to staff and to move their programs online. And part of this was really to acknowledge that fragmentation isn't just structural, it's cultural as well. So then that led us to think about how we support diverse needs across disciplines and microcultures. And part of and these are the microcultures I'm referring to within schools or within program teams that influence how staff interpret guidance or adopt frameworks or engage with change. So recognizing them is really crucial because in my experience, that one size fits all approach rarely works. And then there are other considerations which we were highlighted in the chat and also in the poll there about what the governance and what resources will we need to sustain this change. You know, who would be involved in the development? And from this work, I knew it had to be an institutional framework, not just a set of tips about good design. It really needed to reflect that complexity of our context and be accessible to staff with varying levels of experience and in online design and delivery of teaching. So, you know, thinking back on all of that, the ambition really was to create a framework too that could unify practice and get that shared and start with a shared understanding or shared foundation. And we wanted to, within that, respect diversity. So, and embed learn and centered principles, because those were the things that were the priorities that really our students had highlighted and reflected back to us in initial focus groups and also our staff as well. Okay, so the next step after really for us was to think about how then we could translate strategy and evidence into practice. And this really was a key stage. You can't skip over this. And when I'm talking about this section here, I'm talking about how do you translate the strategy and how do you translate the evidence into accessible language so it can be understood and actioned by anyone involved in education at the university, no matter their role or level of experience. So this might be, you know, simplifying jargon or management speak that might come from a strategy, or taking complex ideas and breaking them down into practical steps so that busy staff could quickly pick up and understand and apply. So what I did just to get started with this process was really to map out institutional priorities related to this area, our core university values, and then look at the university strategy at the time And then I looked at, key pedagogic principles and sector evidence. So I was trying to line this up as best I could. And for those who know me, I do love a mind map. So this was quite an enjoyable process in some ways. But it really helped me to connect the dots between the strategic intent and those practical decisions staff and students would need to make. And so when, with my colleague, Helen Carmichael, we started to draft that initial structure. And this partnership was really crucial, and it just highlights you need to get the right expertise on board when you're developing frameworks. For us, obviously, we had to develop at pace during COVID, so having that combined expertise, we were able to write something quickly. But it was a really important step to have the right people involved in the development process. And then on the slide, you can just see a quote from our VP of Education at the time, and he said, and he sent this out to many across the university, that the framework is developed from research-based evidence of what works in online education, then adapted to reflect our university values and ethos. And that was really important point. And then it would help us to design online provision that promotes engagement, belonging, as well as effective learning. And I think having that quote from the Vice President of Education, that endorsement, was really important. And it brings me on to my next stage, which is securing senior leadership endorsement and shared ownership with stakeholders. It's really, really important. It's a crucial stage because leadership endorsement does more than just approve your document. It can give people permission and the confidence to act. And it really smooths that path for embedding it into existing structures. So, it can align, including governance, but also aligning it across, professional development initiatives as well. So in the early stages of development, we sought, support from our Vice President of Education, our senior leaders, and this really removed barriers, it opened doors, and it provided that valuable feedback on how to pitch the framework. And it also helped us as well because then we're able to embed it in the quality handbook and as I said, the university professional development offer. But leadership endorsement really isn't enough, unfortunately. For a framework to work, it must be co-owned by the education community and really implemented well. So stage 4 of the process was thinking about that implementation plan. So once you've got your framework approved, you've got to purposely implement it. And so while a key strength of an institutional framework is it can be shared across a university, that commonality also brings challenges. So it needs interpreting in ways that can make sense for every discipline and every context. So what you need to include and how you do it within the rollout of or launch of a framework needs really careful consideration. So what did we do? We provided the framework in a range of formats. So we including online brochures and resources, and these were viewed like over 6,000 times in the first 6 months. But also we had a series of sessions just to socialise the framework within schools and departments across the institution. And then we set up an online network of representatives from 25 schools. And this was really set up to explore how we could interpret the framework in meaningful ways for academic staff. So the intention of this team of 25 is that they would promote and support the rollout of the framework within their schools and departments as we have at our university. Alongside that was a suite of professional development resources that supported the framework. And one workshop in particular, which was called the Rapid Review and Implementation Workshop, which I developed with my colleague Anna Ruff, really brought that framework to life. And that was using the 4 lenses tool of the framework. So that was with a train-the-trainer approach. So we enable program teams to really evaluate their course through that learner-centered lens. And the feedback was that this was the one thing that was really practical and helped colleagues enhance their programs. And, as one module lead put it, it was like structuring teaching around that teamwork and using those 4 lenses principles within the framework really allowed that successful delivery of the module online. And they saw an increase in attendance by 95 to 100% each week, which was really successful. And then also just thinking about how we transition then back to face-to-face delivery, the framework also helped educators because then they could identify those gems, so digital learning improvements just continued beyond COVID. But the key tip here really is, I suppose, for this stage is that the rollout plan must empower colleagues and not really impose practice. It really needs to be embedded in a way that will fit well within your existing structures as well. And then finally, the fifth stage, I'd suggest, well, this is the fifth stage that I found was helpful, was that really to keep that framework relevant and endorsed, it must adapt to the institution and the education or landscape it operates in. And this means really regularly evaluating the impact and the value. And for us, this evidence came over from multiple sources over multiple years. So we had internal reports and student co-design panels, case studies and feedback from a diverse range of stakeholders that we use in the framework. And these insights really confirmed that the principles behind the framework mattered, and it highlighted that we really needed that continual development of the framework and its resources and that joined up support. And so Helen and I really built on that success of the online framework, and we consulted over 290 staff, and that's led, we consulted staff and students to really get some feedback on what they thought a high quality, distinctive Southampton education experience should look like. And then this consultation has then led to a new university framework for education. So this is a new overarching framework that brings together a range of existing guides and frameworks and expertise and tools. And it's there to create that shared understanding of what good looks like. So no matter the discipline or mode or level of study. And you can see some screenshots here of that on this slide. And it's only just been recently approved by University Education and Student Experience Committee, but it will follow a similar implementation plan that what we did with the online framework. And you can see as well, you might spot that the elements of good design in this new framework mirror and have been built on from the old framework. So we're really building on those areas of good practice. Okay. And so having a framework like this now, bringing in all those different pieces of work and reducing that fragmentation means that staff who are designing a new program or refreshing an existing one or responding to emerging practices like AI can use the framework as a practical starting point. So it's designed to unify that practice and resources to support program leads and their teams effectively while they deliver those enhancements in their course. So that's my 5 stages there. But one thing I would highlight is don't stop with the end product. If it adds value, the online framework really turned disruption into direction for us, and it strengthened that digital education provision for our staff and students. And it also went on to inform our academic development strategy and has shaped future digital education projects. So if you have something similar in your institution, really use that momentum and endorsement to scale what works and then influence change and keep the conversation alive, keep those conversations that matter. So I'm just going to take a break here. I can see there's quite a lot of comments coming in, and I thought we could do an interactive exercise if that's all right for a few minutes, Linda, unless you wanted to highlight anything.
No, that's great. I think there's been some really interesting kind of conversations, and Tim Seal has shared your framework. He's sent the link for that, which is really helpful. I like, the clarity of your 5 steps. I think that's really, really, really helpful. And people noted, the importance of inclusion and stakeholder buy-in and so on. So I think that was great. So you'd like us to do the second VVOX. One thing I will say, Bobbi, and Matt Jenner has picked up on this, is that people in the chat have been talking about the work that's been done in the online space to develop approaches to educational development, educational design, have influenced the face-to-face stuff as well. So it's been really valuable, and we saw lots of that happening during COVID and then post-COVID. That that much stronger engagement with pedagogy. It suddenly became so important for us all. Hence this series of webinars.
I think it's so important, and I think you're right. It really has influenced. Like I said, my background's in digital education. Now I'm looking at writing up the institutional education framework, which is more than just digital. But of course, it's all integrated and weaved into what we do now. So it's very, very important. Okay, so we've got the results up there. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Matt, for sharing those on there. Um, and you can see, wow, the one that stands out, well, the two that stand out the most to me are the PVC for education and also students. We can see academics looks like a close third. The biggest image you can see there on the word cloud, and then IT as well, which is surprising but not so surprising as well, because we talked about who manages the resources as well that influences that strategy. Um, and then we've got a number of different uh, areas. So we've got digital education, we've got development office, we've got teaching development, education managers. So even just looking at this, we can really see that there is a, a, um, a lot of fragmentation on who influences the strategy in online and digital education in different organizations. So given time, I'm just going to sort of do a quick
Bobbi, I just
final
wanted to
review.
say I
Yeah.
spotted something there because there's
I,
quite a few responses that are about money.
oh,
Bottom
okay.
line or the finance director, etc. So and generated income and so on. So there's obviously a theme there about money, which is good.
Yes. Well, yes. Okay. I can see that now. Budget. So that is obviously a big factor as well as who's going to be influencing the strategy. Unfortunately, we don't always have an open checkbook for what we need. So just given that we've got about 10 minutes left, I'm just going to quickly wrap up with some final thoughts. Okay, so let's just bring this all together then. And if we really do think that fragmentation, um, if we really think about this, so if if let's think about this in a way that if sorry, let me start again. Thinking about how you can influence change, no matter your role. What I've learnt from the development and implementation of institutional frameworks is that large strategic initiatives often get the spotlight or they grab the headlines, but it's the accumulation of that incremental, intentional actions by many that really creates that sustainable change. And so every educator, every academic, teams, or students influence this. And it's through those reflective practices, that informed design, and that shared commitment to improving learning that we can get that change. And so it's those deliberate steps that we've looked at that can reduce fragmentation and really improve that communication and align resources. And often this work is quiet. You don't see it happening. But over time, it really generates the momentum that accelerates that systematic improvement. And so, of course, the pandemic undeniably fast-tracked digital adoption, but embedding that lasting change takes more than urgency. Um, I'd suggest it requires that collaboration, that really intentional focus, and those shared principles and that cultural alignment. So now that we've got AI that's reshaping educational practice and the way that we're thinking about teaching and learning, we do face some similar questions. And one of those is really, how do we support staff to integrate innovation and take on those new approaches in ways that really strengthens the pedagogy and improves those educational practices. And ultimately, we're looking to improve the student outcomes. So for me, one part of the solution is using those frameworks as enablers, not thinking them as static documents, but as real tools to guide conversation, to support that consistency and that inclusive practice. And I'd say as well, you want to encourage that multidisciplinary collaboration, especially we're in a sector that's evolving all the time and under pressure. So I'm going to leave you with one question, and that is, what small action could you take to influence institutional thinking or practice? Whether you've got an existing framework that you want to contribute to or you're building one, what's your role? Because like I said, everybody can play a part in this. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time and your engagement today. It's been absolutely wonderful. That's it from me.
Bobbi, thank you so much. absolutely brilliant, and lots of responses coming in. Now you left us with a question there. It would be helpful if you repeated that, or have you got it on your screen?
I don't have it on the screen. It probably would have been helpful. So the question
Don't worry.
is, that's all right, I can put it in the chat as well, but one small action could you take to influence institutional thinking and practice?
All right, an
Yeah.
excellent reflection, particularly in relation to this idea of reflecting on the series, and we'll be providing kind of reflection prompts, so that's a really good one. So one small action that we could take to influence our institutions' frameworks or strategies. Brilliant, great. I'd just like to kind of invite colleagues to put questions in the chat if they'd like to. If there are things that you want to drill down a bit more with Bobbi, or if there are things in a way that you want to argue with Bobbi about, I'll protect her a bit. But this is a dialogue. I think it would be really helpful to just think, just explore what are people thinking about the work that Bobbi's reported here and the kind of approaches that she's taken, and where are some questions. So I'll just leave a couple of minutes for that. I think Nick's put a really good one, and it may relate to what Liz has asked as well. What are your best approaches for influencing reluctant academic leads?
That's a really, really good question. I would say that there's a couple of different approaches. One, that you have to be prepared that it can take time. So you really need to build trust, and that can come from a number of different sources. So it might be that they want to know that you can deliver on what you say you're going to deliver, or you have the expertise in that area. You're not going to come and tell them what to do, for example. So there's probably a number of different approaches. So you really need to go in and have those conversations, those open conversations, and really listen to some of the challenges that they're facing. And so those first couple of meetings you have with those reluctant colleagues mightn't even be about the work that you're doing. It's just a listening exercise, and then looking at where you can help or work alongside them initially until you build that trust. And then once you get that buy-in, they can be your biggest advocates, I've found, in adopting and then telling others as well.
Absolutely. Well, that's brilliant. Thank you. I think you mentioned the scale, which was, I think you said something like 25 schools or 21 schools. So it was a pretty big scale for the work that you had to do. I think George asked a question, the argument for the educational value of digital learning and the need for the skills it develops in students are evident. But is digital learning still marginal in universities? And actually that reflects some other comments that were made earlier on about, the importance of digital, but actually, is it really impacting particularly the face-to-face student experience?
I think it's incredibly important, and it does impact the student experience. I mean, I can't think of many courses these days that would purely just paper and face-to-face. There's some element of digital learning, whether that's using a VLE. Admittedly, that's not always used well, but there is an element of digital learning, I'd say, suggest in most programs now. And it is incredibly important. It goes back to that point I was talking about, where you need to keep those conversations alive that matter. So obviously COVID brought digital learning and digital education to the forefront, but those things can fade. So you really need to be able to keep that happening. And I think that was really one of my priorities when I developed this new framework. So it's not an add-on, it's really weaved through the elements of good design we've got there. So it doesn't sit alone. We're thinking about that in each of those elements that we would help to support programs teams with their design.
That's absolutely brilliant. Bobbi, there's a lot more comments there, and what we said in these new webinar series is that we would be happy to stay on for another 15 minutes to discuss more with anybody who's available to stay, and I recognise you may not have more than an hour with us. So just to close this part, and then we'll carry on with the conversation if that's okay. So thank you very much to everybody who's joined us today, and thank you so much for a fantastic interaction and discussion that's gone on. And of course, thank you to Bobbi for a marvellous presentation that was really, really clear and inspiring, absolutely captured, in my opinion, the importance of frameworks, but also really practical ways to work and develop frameworks. So thank you, Bobbi. Thanks to Matt for technical support. And also thanks to Christina, the Code Centre manager, who manages all the enrolment and so on. We're hoping it's working, but always do give us feedback and we will send out an evaluation form. What we're, just to remind you, this is the first of 7 webinars. We hope to see you developing your ideas and your thoughts as we go through. And we'd be really, pleased to see you if you're able to get involved in the Certificate of Achievement and the activities there.